one's taken responsibility just yet.
Right. Well, I mean, Amy's absolutely correct. It's not consistent. You know, Al Qaeda, ISIS, they don't always claim immediately. Sometimes they don't claim. Sometimes they claim acts that they, at the end of the day, weren't responsible for, but find it useful for their agenda. In terms of a reaction to this attack, it's like Groundhog Day, and there's a certain sense of anger, but it's more frustration, and the frustration on the streets, whether it's in France or Germany, anywhere across the EU, here in the U.S., it's this sense of now what? How do we continue to process these attacks? And it's not, it's not good enough to finish something like this and say, okay, well, we got to look at the intel failure. That's typically the go-to. We have to go and figure out, how did this happen? Well, it's not an intelligence failure every time. And the problem is we don't go to the real key 30,000-foot problem, which is, we want to parse these things and say, well, is it Al Qaeda? Is it ISIS? Is it inspired? Is it directed? It doesn't matter from their perspective. We've been fighting the same enemy for decades in terms of Islamic extremism, jihadism. We say this now constantly, but it's the same. And whether they're coming under one banner or another, in a sense, it doesn't really matter. The beast is the same.
Yeah, and it feels like they're getting stronger, Dagan and McDowell. President Hollande extending a state of emergency by 3 months, pledging to hit ISIS even harder.
And I want to ask Mike a question related to that. Mike, why France in particular, with the 10 attacks since the Charlie Hebdo terrorist attack early last year, in about a year and a half? What is going on there in terms of cells that are in the country, in terms of radicalization, and in terms of the lack of security and intelligence potentially?
Yeah, well, you pointed to a really important question here, and part of it is, I hate to say this, but part of it's a self-inflicted wound when you're talking about, the problem that France is dealing with and other parts of the European Union. Look, if you look at the foreign fighters that have traveled to Syria, traveled to Iraq for the Islamic State over the past handful of years, there are more than 80 countries where the foreign fighters have come from. And the numbers are a little bit squishy. It's hard to say, but on average, if you land around 30,000 or so foreign fighters who have traveled to Syria and Iraq over the past handful of years, that is more total than the foreign fighters over a more than 10-year period that traveled to Afghanistan. And if you look at the countries, those 80-plus countries where the foreign fighters have come from over these past few years, that at the top of the list is Tunisia, and then it's Saudis, and then it's Russia. Number 6 is France. This gentleman came from Tunisia. He had French citizenship. And the bottom part of this is, if you think about those 30,000 plus or so foreign fighters who have traveled to Syria and Iraq, general estimates are maybe 30 to 40% have returned home. So think about that. So part of this is just an operational statistical function of the fact that they've got more people now who return to France over the past few years, who are committed, who have been on the battlefield, and are very motivated to continue the fight now in the West.
Right, and we know that there are extremists in France, and there are areas that people do not even go because certain Muslim communities will not assimilate into the rest of the community. Isn't that right, Mike?
Yeah, that is, and part of it, again, is because for years now, for decades, the theory in France and Germany, the UK, and other parts has been this idea of celebrate your own culture.
Yeah.
Here in the U.S., we still tend to say, you come to America, you're American first. And we do a better job here over the years. It's not perfect, but we do a better job of trying to assimilate, trying to blend people into our own culture. Whereas over there, it was it was an active campaign to say, no, you're from wherever. That's your identity.
Right.
And so in a part, they've done this to themselves. They realize the dangers that has created, but it's the horse has left the barn.
Right, which is one of the reasons that the British people said no more. We're getting out of the EU. Now, President Obama condemned the attack, issuing a statement last night. Mike, this is what he said: "Quote, on behalf of the American people, I condemn in the strongest terms what appears to be a horrific terrorist attack in Nice, France, which killed and wounded dozens of innocent civilians. We stand in solidarity and partnership with France, our oldest ally, as they respond to and recover from this attack." Both presidential candidates also came out against it. Steve Rogers, weigh in here. What do you make of the way that this was done? Is this a new way that terrorists are trying, in other words, taking a truck and plowing it into people?
Well, they're changing the way of warfare. They're changing the weapons of war. Many places they know they can't get guns into, or the samurai swords, or the explosives, so they're going to use vehicles. And this was very, very effective. And let me add one thing, Maria. The president comes out with this statement, as he always does. He'll light up the White House in the French colors, and he'll do nothing. Hillary Clinton has echoed that. It seems to me that Donald Trump is the only leader right now in this world who's willing to take ISIS on.